When we think about building a house, we don't just want it to stand up for 100 years.
Right.
We want it to actually be a good place to live.
Yeah.
I mean, we want the plumbing to work perfectly, the air to be clean, the foundation to be completely impervious to the elements.
Absolutely.
Because a house that manages to last a century, but is, full of leaks, drafts, black mold, and a crumbling foundation, that is not a home. That is just a prolonged, miserable structural failure.
Yeah, it's just surviving, not thriving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet, for so many of us, that is exactly how we approach our own biology. We're obsessed with simply adding years to our lives, pushing the biological clock as far as it will stretch.
Without stopping to ask what the actual structural integrity of those extra decades will look like.
Right? It's a profound oversight.
It really is. It is a massive, incredibly distinct difference between structural longevity, which is simply not dying, and actual functional quality, which is thriving. Modern medicine has become exceptionally good at keeping the structural frame standing. We can keep the heart pumping and the lungs expanding well into our 80s and 90s.
But the functional quality inside that frame.
Exactly. The cognitive sharpness, the joint mobility, the emotional resilience, that requires an entirely different set of blueprints.
And that brings us perfectly to the core mission of today's deep dive. Welcome, everyone. I'm genuinely thrilled you are joining us today.
It's going to be a great one.
We are looking at an incredible, dense stack of material we've gathered, collectively titled The Architect's Blueprint for Longevity and Mental Resilience.
Yeah, we are talking about living not just longer, but fundamentally, qualitatively better.
I know you, listening to this right now, whether you are driving to work, folding laundry, or just sitting down with a cup of coffee, you are looking for these exact tools.
Right, because you already know the basics. You know to eat your vegetables and get some sleep.
Yeah, you want to bypass the massive, overwhelming information overload out there. You want to extract the actual deeply researched, actionable insights that can fundamentally change the trajectory of your health and your mind.
It is so incredibly easy to get buried in the noise. Every single day there is a new miracle supplement, a new obscure morning routine, a new highly marketed biohack.
Oh, totally. A new biohack that promises to reverse aging.
But what we're looking at today isn't a random collection of isolated tricks. It is a cohesive, scientifically backed system. It's about understanding the underlying mechanisms of action.
Right. Today, we are treating the human body and the human mind as the ultimate integrated architectural project.
We are going to examine the cellular foundation of what we are building.
Then we're going to systematically stress test those biological systems to make them anti-fragile. We'll optimize the HVAC like our breathing mechanics, and our biological rhythms running in the background.
And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we're going to fortify the mind of the architect living inside this structure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin when we look at health through this macro-architectural lens?
We have to begin with the realization that longevity isn't just about a specific diet or a specific exercise protocol operating in these isolated biological silos.
Right, it's not just do cardio and that's it.
Exactly. It is a deeply holistic, intimately interconnected web. It spans from the exact molecular composition of the meals we eat all the way down to the epigenetic signals we are passing on to our children.
Before they are even conceived.
Yes. And even out to the precise emotional labels we consciously choose to use when we are in the middle of a severe personal crisis. Every single element is constantly communicating with the others.
Your gut is talking to your brain, your breathing is dictating your nervous system.
And your environment is literally turning your genes on and off.
So if everything is communicating, we have to start at the absolute baseline, the microscopic level.
The foundation?
Yeah. How does what we consume, and equally importantly, what we consciously choose not to consume, dictate our biological age and how our cells actively clean themselves up?
That's the perfect place to start.
In the material we're analyzing today, Dr. Jason Fung brings up a really fascinating, paradigm-shifting way to look at how we eat.
He makes the argument that overeating is fundamentally a hunger problem, not a calorie problem.
And honestly, that blew my mind a little bit because it completely shifts the blame away from just lacking willpower.
It's a crucial, liberating distinction. For decades, we have been taught to view our bodies as these simple, closed-system thermodynamic calculators.
Calories in, calories out.
Exactly. If you gain weight, you just ate too many calories and didn't burn enough. End of story. But biology is infinitely more complex than simple addition and subtraction.
It's driven by hormones, right?
It is driven by hormones. And Dr. Fung breaks hunger down into three very distinct biochemical and psychological
It's
categories.
okay, let's go through them.
First, you have homeostatic hunger. This is your actual, legitimate physical need for fuel. Your body requires a certain amount of energy ATP to maintain its baseline operations.
To keep your brain firing and your organs functioning, that's the real biological alarm bell. That's the fuel gauge actually hitting empty.
Precisely. It is driven by a hormone called ghrelin, which is secreted by your stomach when it is literally empty.
Okay, that makes sense. But then you have the second type, right?
Yes, hedonic hunger. This is entirely emotional and driven by the brain's reward centers, specifically dopamine.
So eating for pleasure, for comfort, or to soothe stress.
It is the reason you can eat a massive Thanksgiving dinner, feel completely physically stuffed to the point of discomfort, and still somehow find room for a slice of pumpkin pie.
I think anyone listening can relate to that exact scenario. I mean, the pumpkin pie always finds a way.
Your stomach isn't signaling that it needs calories. Your brain is signaling that it wants a dopamine hit from the sugar and fat.
Wow. Okay, and what's the third type?
The third is conditioned hunger, which is purely environmental or habitual.
Like feeling hungry simply because the clock on the wall strikes noon.
Exactly. Even if you are sitting at a desk and haven't burned any energy, or it's walking past a bakery, smelling fresh sourdough bread, and suddenly your mouth is watering.
Even if you just ate a heavy breakfast an hour ago.
Right. Your body has been classically conditioned, just like Pavlov's dogs, to expect food based on external cues rather than internal energetic needs.
It's incredible how often we confuse hedonic or conditioned hunger for the real homeostatic deal. We feel a craving, and we interpret it as a biological mandate to eat.
And if we want to get a handle on this hormonal chaos, Dr. Fung suggests a very specific intervention.
Called a protein-sparing modified fast, or PSMF. Now, the metric he outlines here is incredibly specific.
Yes, he advises eating exactly 30 to 50 grams of high-quality protein at your very first meal of the day.
And the biological reason for this is that it provides actual systemic glucose control for a full 24 hours. But I have to push back on this terminology a little bit.
Yeah.
When the average person hears the word fast, they immediately think of just drinking pure water for days on end, feeling dizzy, lightheaded, and miserable. I mean, pure water fasting sounds absolutely brutal.
It can be very intense.
Do we really have to suffer that much to get the metabolic benefits of fasting?
And that is exactly why the protein-sparing modified fast was developed. You absolutely do not have to engage in pure, miserable deprivation to get profound metabolic benefits.
Oh, thank goodness.
In fact, when your primary goal is sustainable fat loss and metabolic health, a pure water fast can sometimes backfire, especially if you aren't adapted to it.
Because your body panics.
Yes. When you drop your calories to absolute zero, your body panics. It views the situation as a famine. And while it will burn fat, it will also start breaking down your own precious muscle tissue.
Just to harvest amino acids for energy.
Right, a process called gluconeogenesis. Losing muscle is the absolute last thing we want when we are talking about longevity.
Right. Muscle is the organ of longevity. It's our metabolic sink for glucose. So help me visualize this. Is the protein-sparing modified fast sort of like sending in a highly specialized, targeted cleaning crew into a building?
I love that analogy.
You're letting the body do its deep cleaning and repair work, getting about 80% of the profound biological benefits of a total fast. But you are actively working around the structural support columns of the building.
Yes, exactly. Meaning you get 50% less suffering, but you perfectly preserve your lean muscle mass because you've supplied just enough raw material.
Wow. Okay.
By consuming that specific bolus of 30 to 50 grams of protein, and we're talking about things like lean meats, eggs, or high-quality whey isolate, you are doing something very specific biochemically.
What's happening with the insulin?
Protein has a minimal impact on insulin compared to carbohydrates. So your insulin levels remain relatively low, which keeps your body in a fat-burning state.
But crucially, that heavy protein intake floods your bloodstream with circulating amino acids.
Yes. Your body senses those amino acids and says, okay, we have enough raw material. We do not need to break down our own skeletal muscle.
You protect those structural columns.
But because you haven't flooded the system with carbohydrates and massive calories, you still allow the biological cleanup processes to happen in the background.
You get the metabolic advantages, the glucose stabilization, the appetite suppression, without the extreme physical toll of starvation.
And the downstream effect of that 30 to 50 grams of protein in the morning is that it severely blunts the release of ghrelin.
That hunger hormone we talked about.
Right, it blunts it for the rest of the day. It makes ignoring those hedonic and conditioned hungers so much easier because you aren't fighting a biological imperative.
Now, speaking of that deep cellular cleanup, the material introduces us to Leslie Kenny and her fascinating work with what scientists call a fasting mimetic.
Because again, the goal is how to trigger this deep cleaning process without actually starving ourselves.
Right, and the specific biological process we are trying to trigger is called autophagy. The word literally translates from Greek to self-eating.
It sounds terrifying, but it is actually the ultimate anti-aging mechanism.
So how does it work?
Over time, as our cells metabolize energy and deal with stress, they accumulate damage. Proteins become misfolded, mitochondria become dysfunctional, and cellular junk builds up.
Just normal wear and tear on the house.
Exactly. Autophagy is the process where your cells identify this damaged aging junk, encapsulate it, break it down using enzymes, and recycle the raw materials.
To build new, healthy cellular components, it's the ultimate cellular recycling program.
It is, but the catch is that autophagy is highly sensitive to nutrient intake. When you eat a big meal, especially one high in carbohydrates or certain amino acids, your body activates a nutrient-sensing pathway.
This is MTO, right?
Yes, mTOR. You can think of mTOR as the body's primary growth switch. When mTOR is turned on, your body is in building mode. It's building muscle, storing fat, creating new tissue.
And when MTOR is on, autophagy is strictly turned off.
Your body won't clean house while it thinks it's time to build an addition. Historically, the only way to powerfully trigger autophagy was to stop eating entirely.
Suppress MTOR and let the cleanup crew go to work.
Which brings us to Leslie Kenny's work, because she highlights a specific, naturally occurring compound called spermidine.
What fascinates me is that spermidine acts as this fasting mimetic. It is a compound found naturally in foods like shiitake mushrooms, aged cheeses, legumes.
And especially natto, which is a traditional Japanese fermented soybean dish.
Right. And spermidine tricks the body into initiating this deep cellular cleanup, autophagy, without requiring a complete fast. But here's the critical, mind-blowing part about the biochemistry.
It manages to do this without completely inhibiting mTOR.
Which is an incredibly rare and absolutely vital mechanism.
As we discussed with the protein fasting, if you inhibit mTOR completely and constantly, you lose muscle mass, you become frail.
Right.
Spermidine operates on a different parallel biological pathway. It interacts with the AMP-activated protein kinase pathway, or AMPK.
So it allows you to activate the cleanup crew, turning on autophagy to clear out the cellular junk, while keeping the muscle-building pathway, MTOR, perfectly intact.
It is the holy grail of cellular biology, cleaning out the waste without sacrificing the structural integrity of the tissue.
The clinical data on this is just wild. There's a specific study Kenny points to from Kyoto University that completely blew my mind. I really want you, the listener, to visualize this.
The mouse study.
Yes. The researchers took a group of elderly mice, and these mice were at the absolute end of their lifespan, naturally riddled with massive tumors.
Their immune systems were completely exhausted, suffering from what we call immunosenescence.
The T cells were effectively blind and too weak to fight the cancer. So the researchers started administering spermidine to these elderly dying mice.
And what happened next is a powerful demonstration of applied biochemistry. The spermidine entered the system and massively upregulated autophagy, specifically within the exhausted immune cells.
Yeah.
It forced those T cells to clean out their accumulated internal waste, replacing damaged mitochondria with fresh, efficient ones.
The compound literally rejuvenated their aging immune cells back to a youthful state.
And once those T cells were repaired and functioning properly, the newly rejuvenated immune system actively sought out, targeted, and cleared the cancer from the mice's bodies.
The tumors shrank. It's staggering. It wasn't the spermidine that killed the cancer.
No, it was the spermidine that repaired the immune system. And the immune system did the job it was originally designed to do.
And Leslie Kenny isn't just speaking theoretically about these mechanisms. Her personal story is honestly one of the most intense, inspiring examples of biological architecture repair I've ever come across.
It's an incredible story.
At age 39, she was diagnosed with 2 severe autoimmune conditions simultaneously, rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. Her immune system was fundamentally attacking her own connective tissues and organs.
Her doctors told her point blank that she had only 5 years to live.
And to make it even more devastating, they explicitly informed her that her eggs were no longer viable. Her dream of having a baby was mathematically over. I mean, talk about a total structural collapse of the body's systems.
It was a massive systemic crisis. Her body was essentially locked in a constant state of friendly fire.
But instead of accepting that 5-year timeline as a fixed destiny, she approached her body as an architect trying to salvage a condemned building.
She undertook a radical systemic reconstruction. She didn't just take immunosuppressants to mask the symptoms. She went to the absolute root causes.
She completely changed her diet, running extensive elimination protocols to identify and remove all of her specific inflammatory food triggers.
And she realized that her physical inflammation was deeply tied to her psychological state. So she went through intense trauma therapy to regulate her nervous system and lower her chronic cortisol levels.
And she also used a very specific medical intervention called intravenous immunoglobulin, or IVI. It essentially reboots the immune system. For those listening who might not know, how exactly does IVG work in a case like severe lupus?
IVIG is a fascinating treatment. It involves administering highly concentrated, purified antibodies extracted from the blood plasma of thousands of healthy donors.
Okay, so a massive influx of healthy antibodies.
Exactly. When you infuse this massive dose of healthy, pooled antibodies into a patient with an autoimmune disease, it essentially overwhelms and neutralizes the patient's own rogue, disease-causing autoantibodies.
It alters the behavior of the macrophages and B cells.
Right, acting as a profound systemic reset. It temporarily quiets the friendly fire long enough for the body's tissues to begin repairing themselves.
And the result of this massive, multi-pronged architectural repair, she successfully reversed her biological age. She completely defied that 5-year death sentence.
Her systemic inflammation plummeted.
And the most incredible part, at age 43, 4 years after being told her eggs were completely non-viable, she naturally gave birth to a healthy baby girl.
It is a remarkable testament to the concept of plasticity. It perfectly illustrates that our biological destiny, even when faced with severe chronic illness, isn't necessarily fixed.
When you systematically remove the damaging inputs and consistently provide the right regenerative signals,
Whether through diet, stress reduction, or targeted medical therapies, the human body has a profound, almost miraculous capacity to repair itself at the cellular level.
we're seeing this overarching theme everywhere in this material. Health is about providing the precise, correct biological signals at the right time,
Absolutely.
which leads us to Dave Asprey. He brings up another incredible, highly actionable tool for building our cellular foundation: hacking our glucose absorption.
This is a great transition.
No, we just talked about controlling glucose via heavy protein bolus in the morning, but Asprey has a very specific mechanical protocol using fenugreek seeds.
And I say mechanical because it's not about restricting what you eat, but changing the physics of how your stomach processes it.
Yes, the fenugreek protocol is a brilliant mechanical intervention that takes advantage of plant biology to alter human digestion.
The process he outlines is quite simple but highly effective. You take a tablespoon of raw fenugreek seeds and soak them in a glass of water overnight.
Okay, and then what?
The next day, you drink the water, and then you actually chew and swallow the hydrated seeds approximately 15 to 20 minutes before consuming a carbohydrate-heavy meal.
Okay, so why fenugreek? What is physically happening inside the gastrointestinal tract when you do this?
Fenugreek seeds contain an incredibly high concentration of a specific type of soluble fiber called galactomannan.
Right.
When you soak the seeds overnight, that fiber hydrates and expands. When you chew them and they enter the acidic environment of your stomach, they form a thick, highly viscous, mucilaginous gel.
Think of it like a biological sponge.
Exactly. When you eat your high-carbohydrate meal shortly after, that fenugreek gel physically traps the glucose molecules from the food.
It creates a physical barrier.
Yes, a barrier that drastically slows down the rate at which your stomach empties its contents into the small intestine. And once it reaches the small intestine, that gel continues to shield the carbohydrates from the brush border enzymes that break them down.
So instead of a massive rush of pure glucose flooding the bloodstream and spiking your insulin through the roof, it becomes a slow, controlled trip.
The exact metric from the research is that this simple, inexpensive protocol actively lowers your post-meal glucose spike by 5 to 20%.
Which is highly significant when we talk about longevity.
What's fascinating here is how both Dr. Fung's heavy protein rule in the morning and Asprey's fenugreek gel trick before dinner are entirely focused on manipulating the biological timing.
And the literal velocity of glucose entering the system.
Right, they aren't demanding that you adopt a miserable zero-carbohydrate diet and never eat a potato again.
They are acknowledging that the poison is in the dose, and more specifically, the speed of the dose.
It's about managing the flow of energetic resources so that it doesn't overwhelm the mitochondria and cause a massive inflammatory spike.
And constantly managing that flow has compounding massive long-term effects on the physical structure of your body, particularly your blood vessels.
Asprey references a staggering 6-month clinical trial out of the University of Surrey that perfectly highlights this.
They took a group of healthy adults all over the age of 40 and gave them a targeted, multi-ingredient longevity stack.
This stack was specifically formulated to support NAD metabolism.
Which is crucial for cellular energy, right?
Yes, and broad mitochondrial function. But it wasn't the ingredients that blew me away. It was the specific biomarker they chose to measure. They didn't just look at weight loss, they measured arterial stiffness.
Which is arguably one of the most vital metrics of human aging. Arterial stiffness is exactly what it sounds like.
As we age, and as we subject our blood vessels to constant spikes of glucose, inflammation, and oxidative stress, the delicate endothelial lining of our arteries becomes damaged.
The smooth muscle calcifies and loses its elasticity. The vessels become rigid pipes instead of flexible, dynamic hoses.
This forces the heart to pump exponentially harder to push blood through the system, leading to high blood pressure, microvascular damage, and eventually cardiovascular events.
So how do they measure that?
Medical science measures the stiffness using a metric called pulse wave velocity. Literally how fast a pressure wave travels through your arteries. The stiffer the artery, the faster the wave travels.
So they tracked these adults for 6 months, and the results were, frankly, staggering.
After 6 months on this specific cellular support protocol, their arterial stiffness improved by a measurement of 1.18 meters per second.
Now, to the average person, 1.18 meters per second sounds like abstract math. Can you translate what that actual physiological change means for someone's biological age?
To put that specific measurement in perspective, a reduction of 1.18 meters per second in pulse wave velocity is effectively reversing vascular aging by several years.
If not a decade, depending on the baseline.
It means the calcification is reducing. The endothelial cells are producing more nitric oxide, allowing the smooth muscle to relax.
The blood vessels are physically regaining their youthful elasticity, which takes an enormous, life-saving amount of mechanical pressure off the heart.
It is the definition of restoring structural integrity to the building's plumbing.
That is incredible. So we've laid down this really solid cellular foundation. We're managing our hunger hormones. We're triggering deep cellular cleanup with spermidine. And we're controlling the velocity of glucose to protect our vascular plumbing.
But a foundation, no matter how strong, isn't enough on its own.
Exactly. If we are building a truly resilient structure, we have to subject it to the elements, we have to stress test it.
We transition now from the materials going into the body to the environmental stresses acting upon it.
And crucially, we need to look at how those environmental stresses actually alter the biological blueprints we pass on to the next generation.
This brings us to a concept known as hormesis, which raises an incredibly important biological question.
How do we consciously apply intentional, acute, beneficial stress to make the organism fundamentally stronger and more adaptable to future unpredictable stress?
And Dr. Andrew Huberman provides an absolute masterclass on this concept through the use of deliberate heat exposure, specifically using the sauna.
He details how the intense heat of the sauna doesn't just make you sweat, but acts as profound cardiovascular mimicry and actively triggers literal genetic repair.
The underlying mechanisms are brilliant, but the protocol he outlines to achieve these specific results is highly exact.
Tell me about the protocol.
To get the maximum scientifically validated benefit, he states you need to expose yourself to deliberate heat 4 to 7 times a week.
4 to 7 times.
Yes. We are talking about raising your core body temperature in an environment ranging from 80 to 100 degrees Celsius. That's a blistering 176 to 212 degrees Fahrenheit.
For how long?
For anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes per uninterrupted session.
I have to pause you right there, because I am trying to put myself in the shoes of the listener. I'm a working professional. If I have a commute, a full-time job, and kids to pick up from soccer practice, hitting a 200-degree sauna 7 days a week sounds completely, wildly impractical.
That's a very fair point.
Factoring in the drive to the gym, the sauna time, the cool down, the shower, that's an hour a day. For a normal person, is that actually feasible? Or are there diminishing returns we can aim for? Is there a minimum effective dose?
It is a completely valid and necessary pushback. The 4 to 7 times a week protocol is the absolute gold standard for maximizing the longevity curve. However, the data clearly shows a massive nonlinear jump in benefits just from going from 0 sessions to 2 or 3 sessions a week.
Okay, so 2 or 3 times is still hugely beneficial.
Yes. The goal isn't necessarily to hit 7 days if it causes immense logistical stress, because chronic stress defeats the purpose. The goal is to consistently trigger the biological cascade of acute heat stress.
So what happens during that heat stress?
When you sit in that extreme heat, your heart rate elevates significantly, often matching the beats per minute of a moderate intensity run.
Your blood vessels drastically dilate to push blood to the skin surface to cool you down, which is why it mimics cardiovascular exercise.
But the magic really happens at the microscopic level, right? And when the cells themselves start to feel the heat.
Exactly. When your cells reach a certain thermal threshold, they begin to express something called heat shock proteins, or HSPs.
Think of HSPs as highly specialized cellular paramedics.
As we age, the proteins inside our cells can become damaged and physically misfolded, losing their 3D structure and their function.
Misfolded proteins are heavily implicated in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's.
So when the sauna induces heat stress, these heat shock proteins flood the cell. They bind to the misfolded proteins and literally refold them back into their correct functional shapes.
Furthermore, the heat activates a specific set of genes called FOXO3, which act as master regulators for DNA repair and tumor suppression.
It's just like tempering steel. A blacksmith takes a piece of iron, plunges it into intense, terrifying heat.
And that extreme environment literally alters the molecular structure to make the blade, or in our case, our DNA, significantly more resilient and harder to break.
That is exactly what is happening in the genetic and molecular level. And the clinical outcomes of this tempering process are undeniable.
Huberman points to a massive, highly respected 2018 cohort study conducted in Finland.
Involving 1,688 participants with a mean age of 63.
They meticulously tracked their sauna use habits and correlated it with cardiovascular mortality over several decades.
The numbers from that study are just wild. If the participants used the sauna 2 to 3 times a week, which, to your point, is that manageable minimum effective dose, they were 27% less likely to die from cardiovascular events.
Compared to people who only went once a week or never.
But if they managed to hit that target protocol of 4 to 7 times a week, they were a staggering 50% less likely to die from cardiovascular events.
Yeah.
Their risk was cut completely in half just from sitting in a hot room.
And beyond the cardiovascular data, Huberman also outlines an extreme, highly specific protocol for those looking for a massive acute systemic shock to their endocrine system.
Oh, this is the growth hormone one.
Yes. If you want to trigger an enormous, completely natural release of human growth hormone, which is vital for tissue repair and metabolism, you can perform 4 30-minute sauna sessions in a single day.
Separated by short cooling periods.
This specific protocol has been shown to yield up to a 16-fold increase in growth hormone, but he is incredibly strict about the parameters.
You must do this extreme protocol no more than once a week, or even once a month.
Right, because the fundamental rule of hormesis is that the dose makes the poison, or in this case, the medicine.
If you apply that extreme heat stress every single day, you overwhelm the body's capacity to adapt. You need the deep recovery time for the body to actually build back stronger.
Now, speaking of profound biological shifts and the passing on of blueprints, our research brings up the groundbreaking work of Dr. Anne Shippey.
She shifts the focus away from how we extend our own lives to how our environmental stress and our cellular resilience literally get passed on to the next generation.
She strongly advocates for treating the preconception period as a dedicated, non-negotiable 3 to 12-month longevity protocol.
Oh, wait, I have to ask you about a specific detail here because the literature specifically calls out men needing to undergo this intense preconception protocol alongside the women.
It does.
I feel like culturally, 99% of the pressure and the medical scrutiny is placed entirely on the mother to eat well and avoid toxins before having a baby. Why is male mitochondrial health suddenly being highlighted as so critical?
It is arguably one of the most massive blind spots in our cultural and medical understanding of fertility. We have treated male fertility as simply a numbers game, sperm count and motility.
Right.
But the sperm does not just deliver half of the raw genetic code, it delivers complex epigenetic markers.
Think of epigenetics as the software that tells the genetic hardware how to run.
And that software has been heavily influenced by the father's current environment, his diet, and his toxic load.
If a man has high oxidative stress, it causes fragmentation in the sperm's DNA.
Dr. Shippey emphasizes that both men and women must actively optimize their cellular energy factories, the mitochondria, before trying to conceive.
She recommends highly specific nutrients like CoQ10, which acts as a crucial electron carrier inside the mitochondria, alongside NAD precursors and phosphatidylcholine, which repairs the cellular membranes.
And beyond just taking the right nutrients to build the battery, she mandates an aggressive, comprehensive detox from synthetic environmental chemicals.
Specifically forever chemicals like PFAS and microplastics.
Yes, and the reason for this is terrifyingly simple. Chemicals like PFAS act as severe endocrine disruptors.
They literally mimic hormones like estrogen in the body, binding to cellular receptors and completely hijacking the signaling pathways.
Because they are designed to be chemically indestructible, hence forever chemicals, they bioaccumulate in our tissues.
If you don't actively work to detoxify the liver and excrete these chemicals through sweat and bile before conception, you are essentially transferring those negative epigenetic markers.
And that toxic burden directly into the foundational blueprint of your child. The preconception period is your absolute best window to literally rewrite that inherited software.
And the real-world clinical application of this philosophy is just beautiful. The research shares two specific case studies from Dr. Shippey's practice that honestly gave me chills.
The first is a 47-year-old woman. Let that sink in. 47.
By all standard medical metrics, natural conception at that age is considered near impossible. But she was able to get pregnant naturally on her very first try.
After completing a strict 3-month protocol dedicated solely to clearing those environmental toxins, repairing her gut lining, and balancing her microbiome.
And the second story is equally, if not more, remarkable. A 44-year-old woman who had suffered terribly. She had severe systemic endometriosis.
To the point where she had actually lost a kidney to the disease tissue spreading.
She'd already suffered through the physical and emotional trauma of multiple failed IVF treatments. Western medicine had largely given up on her fertility.
But after undergoing a comprehensive, functional tune-up of her immune system, drastically lowering her inflammation and optimizing her cellular nutrient status,
she too was able to get pregnant completely naturally.
it just shows how incredibly powerfully our bodies want to heal, to reach homeostasis, and to create new life when we simply remove the toxic burden that is suppressing those natural functions.
And this concept of generational health, of passing down a metabolic blueprint, carries perfectly right into the incredible work of Jessie Inchauspé, who many people know as the glucose goddess.
She looks at how a mother's diet directly programs the baby's future metabolic health while the child is still developing in utero.
This is a fascinating area of study known as fetal programming, and she points to an absolutely incredible historical event that served as a massive, unintended, natural experiment.
The United Kingdom's strict sugar rationing during and after World War II, which lasted continuously from 1940 all the way to 1953.
During that incredibly stressful, deprived time, the government strictly limited the population's added sugar intake to a maximum of just 40 grams a day.
To put that in perspective for the listener, 40 grams of sugar is basically the amount in one single can of regular soda today, and that was their limit for the entire day.
So modern researchers went back and looked at the long-term health data of 60,000 babies who were conceived and born during that strict 13-year rationing period.
And what they discovered is mind-blowing. They found that those ration babies had a 15% decreased lifetime risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
Compared to the babies who were born immediately after 1953, when the rationing ended and cheap sugar suddenly flooded back into the British diet.
Think about the scale of that. 60,000 people with a fundamentally altered, structurally improved lifetime disease risk, simply because of the maternal sugar environment they developed in.
The mechanism behind this is fetal pancreatic programming. When a pregnant mother consumes massive amounts of sugar, her blood glucose spikes.
And that glucose crosses the placenta into the fetal environment. The developing baby's tiny pancreas is forced to overproduce insulin to handle the sugar load.
This early, constant stress literally programs the baby's metabolic set point, making their cells more insulin resistant before they even take their first breath.
Which leads to Inchauspé's highly specific, actionable takeaway. If you are pregnant or planning to be, keep your added sugars strictly under 25 grams a day.
You are literally programming the child's lifelong insulin sensitivity and their baseline risk for metabolic disease.
She also highlights another absolutely critical building block for fetal architecture, a nutrient called choline.
She highly recommends consuming at least 450 milligrams of choline daily, which you can easily and affordably get from eating about 4 whole eggs, yolks included.
Choline is directly responsible for building the structural integrity of the baby's rapidly forming neurons.
It acts as a primary methyl donor for epigenetic tagging, and it is the direct biochemical precursor to acetylcholine, which is the primary neurotransmitter responsible for memory, learning, and cognitive processing.
There is a landmark study from Cornell University that vividly demonstrates this impact. They took 2 groups of pregnant mothers and supplemented one group with roughly 1 gram of choline a day during their critical 3rd trimester.
When the fetal brain is growing exponentially. After the babies were born, they tested their cognitive function.
The babies born to the mothers who received the high choline supplementation demonstrated a 10% faster cognitive reaction time.
Which is a neurological metric heavily and directly correlated with higher adult IQ. You are literally feeding the blueprint of the brain.
Okay, so let's take a breath and review the blueprint so far. We've optimized the foundational matting materials, the cells, the nutrients, the glucose pathways.
We've stress-tested the physical structure with extreme heat and stringent detox protocols to ensure the integrity of the next generation.
Now, we must turn our attention to the invisible, highly automated systems running constantly in the background of our architectural masterpiece.
I'm talking about our breath and our circadian rhythms. This is the ultimate, non-stop HVAC system of the human body. Let's look at the incredibly compelling work of science journalist James Nestor.
He talks about the absolute systemic disastrous effects of mouth breathing and why we must train ourselves to become what he terms obligate nasal breathers.
It seems like such a minor, almost irrelevant thing, right? How air simply enters your body. As long as oxygen gets to the lungs, who cares?
But the physiological downstream anatomical effects of how you breathe are enormous. The nose is a highly complex, intricately designed organ.
It contains turbinates and quanchi that actively filter, heat, and humidify the air before it ever reaches the delicate tissue of the lungs.
When you bypass that system and breathe primarily through your mouth, it actively ruins your oral posture. The tongue drops from the roof of the mouth, the jaw recedes, and over time, it physically shrinks your airway.
Furthermore, chronic mouth breathing triggers the sympathetic nervous system, keeping your body trapped in a constant state of low-grade, exhausting fight-or-flight stress.
Okay, that makes logical sense anatomically. But Nestor offers a specific solution for people who feel constantly congested, who have deviated septums, and who feel like they have to rely on mouth breathing just to survive.
He suggests a highly unconventional protocol: humming. He literally says that humming can clear a severely stuffy nose.
I have to be completely honest here, that sounds a bit like holistic magic to me. How does making a sound with your vocal cords actually physically work to clear severe physical congestion in the nasal cavity?
It sounds like magic, but it is pure applied physics and biochemistry. The protocol he prescribes is to simply hum your favorite song at a low frequency for 10 minutes, 3 to 4 times a day.
When you hum, you create strong acoustic vibrations. Those vibrations physically agitate the endothelial cells lining your paranasal sinuses.
This mechanical shearing force drastically, instantaneously increases the production and release of a miracle gas called nitric oxide inside the sinus cavities.
We are talking about an astonishing 15-fold increase in nitric oxide simply from vibrating the tissue.
And what exactly does that massive dump of nitric oxide do to the congestion?
Nitric oxide is one of the most powerful natural vasodilators and bronchodilators in the human body. When it floods the sinus cavity, it interacts with the smooth muscle surrounding the blood vessels,
Causing them to rapidly relax and dilate. It mechanically opens up the restricted airways, reduces localized inflammation, and acts as a potent antiviral and antibacterial agent.
physically clearing the congestion from the inside out.
That is absolutely wild. 15 times more nitric oxide just from humming a tune in your car. And Nestor didn't just read studies. He proved how vital nasal breathing is to our survival through a pretty extreme, highly uncomfortable personal experiment.
The one he conducted at Stanford University, he literally had his nose surgically plugged with silicone for 10 straight days.
He forced himself to strictly mouth breathe 24 hours a day while scientists monitored his vitals.
The clinical results of that experiment were immediate, severe, and frankly terrifying. Within a matter of days of blocking his nasal passages, his baseline blood pressure spiked into stage 2 hypertension levels.
He suffered from overwhelming, crushing chronic fatigue because his oxygen extraction plummeted.
And perhaps most dangerously, he developed severe disruptive snoring and clinical sleep apnea, experiencing dozens of choking events every single night.
His entire biological architecture basically started to collapse inward on itself.
Exactly. The lack of nitric oxide, the unfiltered air, the collapsed airway, it created a systemic domino effect of structural failure.
But the crucial, deeply optimistic part of the experiment is at the very moment the silicone plugs were removed and he returned to obligate nasal breathing, all of those severe, life-threatening symptoms resolved rapidly.
His blood pressure normalized, the snoring vanished, and his energy returned. The human body desperately wants to be in homeostasis. You just have to give it the correct physical and biomechanical pathway to get there.
The other invisible, highly automated pathway that completely dictates our biology is our relationship with environmental light. Dr. Deanna Minish outlines how we have to constantly align the body's master conductor, our biological clock, or circadian rhythm, through strategic timed light exposure.
Because your biological clock isn't just a metaphor, it is a cluster of thousands of neurons in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus.
And it dictates absolutely everything downstream: your metabolic rate, your digestive enzyme production, your hormonal cycles, and ultimately, your rate of cellular aging.
The protocol Dr. Minich details is rooted in evolutionary biology. You must get bright, natural sunlight directly into your eyes, without sunglasses, immediately upon waking.
The retina contains specific cells called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells that are highly sensitive to blue light.
When sunlight hits them, it sends a high-voltage signal to the brain that says, "It is morning, halt melatonin production, spike cortisol, start the engine."
Then she advises consuming your heaviest, most calorically dense meals when the sun is highest and brightest in the sky, matching your peak digestive fire and insulin sensitivity with the peak solar cycle.
And the flip side of that equation is how we handle the night. She mandates an absolute non-negotiable rule: 0 lux in the bedroom.
Lux is the metric of illumination. She means pitch black. You should not be able to see your hand in front of your face.
It is entirely non-negotiable if your goal is deep cellular repair. And we really have to dive into why 0 lux matters at a biochemical level.
Any artificial light exposure at night, whether it's the blue light from your smartphone, the glowing numbers on a digital clock, or a street lamp filtering through thin curtains,
It hits those retinal cells and violently suppresses the pineal gland's production of melatonin.
and this is where we need to clear up a massive cultural misunderstanding. Most people just think of melatonin as a mild, over-the-counter sleep aid you buy in a gummy form at the pharmacy when you have jet lag. They think of it as a sedative.
That is the most common and limiting misconception in modern health. Yes, melatonin facilitates the onset of sleep, but that is merely its side job.
Melatonin is, in fact, one of the most powerful, ancient, and deeply penetrating antioxidants ever discovered in the biological world.
It has the unique ability to easily cross cell membranes and enter directly into the mitochondria, the engine room of the cell.
During the day, as your mitochondria burn energy, they produce exhaust highly reactive oxygen species, or free radicals, that tear through the cell, damaging proteins and shredding DNA.
A normal antioxidant, like vitamin C, can neutralize one free radical before it is spent, but a single molecule of melatonin can systematically scavenge and neutralize up to 10 free radicals in a cascade reaction.
It is the ultimate terminal antioxidant. If you suppress its natural production with a glowing screen or a poorly lit bedroom, you are literally robbing your cells of their primary, irreplaceable nighttime defense mechanism against accelerated aging and genetic mutation.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We are seeing in vivid detail how deeply and intimately tethered the physical human body is to the external environment.
The light hitting our retinas, the ambient heat altering our DNA, the physical mechanics of oxygen entering our skull. The physical body acts as a direct biological bridge into our mental state.
Which brings us to our final and perhaps most vital phase of this entire architectural project. Because let's be completely honest.
A perfectly engineered physical body with crystal clear arteries, zero senescent cells, and perfectly optimized genes means absolutely nothing if there isn't a resilient, adaptable, and purpose-driven architect living inside it.
We have to transition from optimizing the biological systems to fortifying the psychological foundation. We must build an invincible mind.
It is the ultimate synthesis. The psychological architecture is the master governor of the physical body. You can have the best plumbing and foundation in the world, but if the occupant of the house is constantly tearing at the walls from the inside out due to unmanaged chronic stress and fear, the structure will eventually fail.
Dr. Wendy Suzuki, a brilliant neuroscientist, talks about actively rewiring the brain's fundamental automated response to fear and anxiety through a fascinating technique she calls joy conditioning.
It's an incredibly elegant hack of the central nervous system. The protocol leverages the unique anatomy of the brain.
She advises you to deliberately and deeply link a highly positive, profoundly joyful memory, a moment of deep peace, love, or accomplishment, to a specific, portable olfactory trigger.
For example, the scent of lavender, a specific essential oil, or even a particular brand of tea. In a moment of calm, you deeply inhale the scent. You vividly visualize the joyful memory in high definition, and you intentionally forge a strong neural connection between the smell and the feeling.
Because the olfactory system is totally unique, right? It bypasses the normal sensory relay stations of the
Yeah,
brain.
exactly. Unlike sight or sound, which have to be processed by the thalamus, the olfactory bulb has a direct, hardwired anatomical projection straight into the amygdala, which is the emotional processing center, and the hippocampus, which handles memory.
It is a biological expressway. So then, when you are in the middle of a high-stress scenario, a terrifying presentation at work, a heated argument, a moment of deep anxiety, you simply pull out that vial of lavender and take a deep sniff.
The scent bypasses the conscious panicking mind and immediately activates the parasympathetic nervous system, slamming the brakes on the fight-or-flight response and calming your physiology down in seconds.
It definitively proves that our internal state, our panic response, is highly malleable. We aren't just victims of our neurochemistry.
Suzuki cites an absolutely incredible landmark study by Dr. Aaliyah Crum at Stanford University that perfectly isolates the staggering power of human mindset over physical biology.
Dr. Crum worked with a large group of female hotel cleaning staff. These women were on their feet all day doing intense physical labor, yet remarkably, many of them struggled with high blood pressure and obesity.
And they perceived themselves as getting zero exercise because they didn't go to a traditional gym. So Dr. Crum ran an intervention.
She took half the staff and simply, clearly explained to them that their daily room cleaning duties, the vigorous vacuuming, the heavy lifting of mattresses, the constant scrubbing, were actually high-level physical workouts.
Workouts that easily met the Surgeon General's stringent requirements for an active, healthy lifestyle.
And the crucial, mind-bending part of the experimental design is that the researchers didn't ask the women to change a single thing about their actual physical behavior.
They didn't alter their diets. They didn't ask them to work harder or faster. They just went back to doing their exact same jobs the exact same way.
But because their mindset had fundamentally shifted, because they now consciously viewed their grueling labor not as a source of physical degradation, but as highly beneficial, life-extending exercise, their physical bodies literally responded to the new psychological software.
Over the next month, the workers who received the mindset shift experienced actual, measurable weight loss. Their systolic blood pressure dropped significantly, their body fat percentages decreased, and their overall psychological job satisfaction skyrocketed.
The conscious belief literally rewrote their physical biology. It changed how their bodies metabolized energy and managed systemic inflammation. It's staggering, and it highlights how the labels we attach to our experiences dictate our physical reality.
Now, when we face much darker, more severe mental loops than just workplace stress, Dr. Mai Shankar offers incredibly powerful cognitive tools for creating immediate distance and perspective.
She talks extensively about a psychological mechanism called affect labeling. This means when you are spiraling in a panic attack or deep depression, you force your conscious mind to articulate and name the exact emotion out loud.
You don't say, "I am a wreck." You say, "This specific feeling is grief," or "This physical sensation in my chest is anxiety."
Okay, so affect labeling sounds like stepping out of a raging, destructive thunderstorm, walking inside a sturdy house, and choosing to watch the storm safely from behind a thick, reinforced pane of glass.
You still clearly see the lightning, you hear the thunder, you acknowledge that the storm is very real and happening right in front of you, but the wind is no longer physically knocking you over. You are observing it, not being destroyed by it.
That is a beautiful, highly accurate way to visualize the cognitive distance it provides, because biologically, when you assign a precise linguistic label to an overwhelming feeling, functional MRI scans show that you literally shift the electrical processing of that moment away from the reactive emotional amygdala.
And you force it up into the highly logical right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. You use language to pull your brain completely out of the immediate blinding fight-or-flight panic.
She combines this labeling with a secondary technique called mental time travel. You are trapped in a moment of intense, blinding panic, and you deliberately, forcefully ask yourself, exactly how will I feel about this specific, terrible problem in 5 hours? How will I view it in 5 days? What will this mean to me in 5 years?
It immediately contextualizes the pain. It reminds the brain that the current state is temporary, not permanent. And Dr. Shankar didn't just study these tools in a sterile lab. She had to use them herself to survive a profound personal crisis.
Her entire identity, her lifelong obsessive dream, was to become an elite concert violinist. She was accepted into Juilliard. She was on track to achieve the pinnacle of her field.
And then she suffered a severe, irreversible tendon injury in her hand. The dream was instantly, permanently over. Her entire architectural foundation was shattered.
But she overcame this profound, devastating identity crisis by using these exact cognitive tools. She stepped back and realized that her underlying why, the reason she loved the violin, wasn't actually the wooden instrument itself.
It was the ability to forge a deep, emotional, human connection with an audience. The violin was merely a tool to achieve that connection.
Once she reframed and labeled that core truth, she successfully transitioned her life, redirected that intense focus, and became a highly respected cognitive scientist and podcast host, still deeply connecting with millions of people, just using a different instrument.
She masterfully adapted the fundamental architecture of her life to a completely new foundation, without losing the core structural integrity of who she was.
She also shares a specific story in her work that I honestly haven't stopped thinking about since I first read it. It is the story of Dwayne Betts.
Dwayne was a 16-year-old kid, barely more than a child, who was tried as an adult and incarcerated in a maximum security adult prison for a carjacking.
He was thrown into the darkest, most violent, most structurally hopeless environment imaginable. The psychological pressure to succumb, to become a monster just to survive the environment, was absolute.
But while inside, Dwayne witnessed a fellow inmate acting with profound, completely unexpected dignity. This older inmate, living in a tiny, brutal cell, was carefully, meticulously ironing his prison uniform.
He was working out constantly, keeping his physical body strong, and most importantly, he was actively using his strength to protect the weaker, younger inmates from predation.
It is a breathtaking moment of humanity in a void. Dr. Shankar refers to this psychological phenomenon as moral elevation.
Witnessing that single, quiet act of profound human dignity in a place completely devoid of it acted as a massive shock to Dwayne's nervous system. It completely rewired his internal sense of possible futures. It shattered the concept of learned helplessness.
It totally shattered the script that society and the prison system had handed him. If that man could maintain his sovereign dignity in a cage, so could Dwayne.
Dwayne started reading obsessively. He started writing poetry. He survived his sentence, got out, and went on to become an acclaimed, award-winning poet, and eventually graduated from Yale Law School.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Dwayne Betts' story is the absolute ultimate testament to neuroplasticity. The mindset, the conscious observation of a single powerful moral ideal literally shaped a completely new physical, geographical, and intellectual reality for his entire life.
The software rewrote the hardware.
It proves definitively that the mind can overwrite the environment, no matter how toxic the environment is, which perfectly sets up our final expert in this deep dive, Ken Rideout, and his intensely practical mechanics for pushing past immense fear and biological suffering.
Rideout operates on a deeply pragmatic framework that he calls the 5149 rule.
It's a brutally honest, unsentimental framework. The 5149 rule openly acknowledges that everyone, no matter how tough, no matter how disciplined they are, feels immense dread and fear before doing something truly hard.
There is always, always a voice in your head begging you to stop, to take the easy way out, to stay in bed. Rideout says the critical mistake people make is trying to achieve perfect Zen, trying to silence that voice of doubt completely.
You can't. You just need the voice of determination, the voice of your conscious will, to be exactly 51% louder than the 49% voice screaming at you to quit. You just need a slight mathematical edge.
Okay, the 5149 rule sounds incredibly punchy and simple on paper. It makes for a great motivational quote, but I have to push back hard on this.
How does someone actually practically apply a neat little math equation when they are trapped in the darkest, most chemically dependent place imaginable? When the biological drive to quit isn't just a whisper, but a physiological scream, like in the case of severe, life-threatening opioid addiction?
It's the most important question to ask, because if the rule doesn't work in the abyss, it's just hollow motivation. And Ken Rideout isn't speaking from a place of unearned privilege or theoretical psychology.
He survived a deeply abusive, chaotic childhood that led him directly into a brutal, decade-long opioid addiction. At his absolute lowest, darkest point, he was consuming 40 to 50 Percocets every single day.
The 49% voice of despair wasn't just loud, it was deafening. It was tied directly to his brain's dopamine receptors, which had been completely downregulated. The addiction hijacked his survival instinct, telling him that if he didn't take the pills, he would literally die.
40 to 50 pills a day. That isn't just a bad habit. That is a total biological prison. The structural integrity of his body and mind was in complete collapse.
Absolute systemic collapse. But within that hell, he found that 51%. He tapped into a microscopic reserve of will. He didn't just meditate his way out, he used applied medical science alongside his willpower.
He got sober through a grueling, agonizing medical detox, and he utilized a medication called Vivitrol, which is an injectable form of naltrexone that completely blocks the mu-opioid receptors in the brain, effectively neutralizing the physiological effects of the drugs.
Right as he was fighting tooth and nail for his fragile sobriety, he and his wife adopted his daughter from Ethiopia. He suddenly had an external architectural pillar, a reason to endure the suffering.
And then he did something brilliant. He took all of that raw, obsessive, compulsive energy that had been actively destroying him for a decade, and he completely intentionally redirected it into the most grueling endurance sports on the planet.
He literally turned the pathology of his addiction into a superpower for enduring extreme physical suffering. Ken Rideout went on to win the 155-mile Gobi March, a multi-day ultramarathon foot race across the scorching deserts of Mongolia.
And then, at the age of 52, when most men are accepting physical decline as inevitable, he won the Masters 50-plus Marathon World Championship.
It is the ultimate breathtaking synthesis of absolutely everything we have discussed in this entire blueprint, whether it is chemically clearing out senescent, aging zombie cells with a natural compound like spermidine,
Or repairing broken, fragmented DNA strands with extreme, deliberate cardiovascular heat stress in a sauna.
or consciously overriding a massive neurochemical 49% desire to succumb to a lethal addiction with a 51% drive to survive, adapt, and thrive for the sake of your daughter. Longevity and mental resilience are never, ever passive states.
They are not things that just happen to you if you get lucky. They are highly active, continuous, deeply intentional architectural processes.
So as we wrap up this massive exploration of human potential, what does this all actually mean for you listening right now?
If you are sitting in your car or walking your dog and you've absorbed all of this intense biology and psychology, what is the core takeaway? It means that you have significantly, exponentially more control over your biological age, your genetic expression, and your psychological future than society, or perhaps even your own doctor often tells you.
You are not just a helpless passenger trapped in a decaying, badly built building. You are the master architect, and you now have the exact blueprints.
You possess the actionable tools to rebuild the cellular foundation, to systematically upgrade the internal systems, to clear out the toxic waste, and to fiercely fortify the mind living inside it. The materials are there. The science is clear. It is just a matter of beginning the daily construction.
And I want to leave you with one final, hopefully provocative thought, something to really chew on and explore on your own as you go about the rest of your day. We've seen the hard data. We know the mechanisms.
If our foundational biology and our deeply ingrained psychology can be fundamentally, radically rewritten at almost any stage of life, as we clearly saw with Ken Rideout winning world championships at 52 after a decade of severe addiction, or Leslie Kenny completely reversing her biological age and having a healthy baby at 43 against all medical odds.
What arbitrary self-imposed limitation have you placed on yourself? What limitation are you currently accepting as an absolute truth that is actually just an outdated piece of code, a crumbling, unnecessary brick waiting for you to simply overwrite it?
Thank you so much for joining us and exploring these incredible life-changing sources with us today. It's been an absolute privilege to share this blueprint with you and unpack these complex mechanisms. Until next time, keep building.